I never thought I'd become the neighborhood rebel, but sometimes life forces your hand. My name is Michael, and after 15 years as a structural engineer specializing in housing developments, I thought I understood how to follow rules. Then I moved into Sunnyside Estates, home of the most infamous homeowner association president in the county, Karen Wilkins, and discovered that sometimes following the rules means fighting the people who claim to enforce them. When I purchased my property 18 months ago, the seller mentioned the homeowner association was particular about appearances. That was like saying the Pacific Ocean is a bit damp or Mount Everest is somewhat massive. My first encounter with Karen happened 3 days after moving. And while I was still surrounded by moving boxes and trying to figure out which circuit breaker controlled the garage, the doorbell rang with an aggressive double chime that would soon become the soundtrack to my homeowner nightmares. Standing there, in a crisp white pantsuit with a pearl necklace that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage, was a woman with the most symmetrical blonde bob I'd ever seen. Her hair didn't move when she tilted her head to inspect me. I'm pretty sure it had enough hairspray to be classified as a fire hazard. Hello there, I'm Karen Wilkins, president of the Sunnyside Estates Homeowner Association. I just wanted to welcome you personally to our little community. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes as she thrust a 3-ring binder into my hands, the gold-embossed words Sunnyside Estates Community Guidelines gleaming in the afternoon sun. All 78 pages are mandatory reading. I suggest highlighting the sections about lawn maintenance and exterior modifications. We've had issues with new homeowners in the past. The way she said issues made it sound like previous residents had attempted to turn their front yards into jungles or paint their houses neon pink. I thanked her politely, thinking this would be the extent of our interaction. How naive I was that evening. Flipped through the handbook while unpacking my kitchen. The document was excessively detailed with rules about everything from the acceptable shades of beige for exterior paint. There were 12 approved variations, each with its own code to the maximum height of garden gnomes 8 in case you're wondering, and the approved flowers for front yard planting organized by season with a helpful chart indicating which colors were community approved. Despite the absurdity, I decided to follow every regulation meticulously. My lawn was mowed to exactly 3.5 inches, never a millimeter more or less. My mailbox matched the approved design perfectly, right down to the specific shade of matte black paint. I even painted my front door sandstone whisper, the only shade of tan allowed for corner lots. With eastern exposure, my trash bins were never visible from the street, except during the approved 12-hour window. On collection day, I was determined to be the model Sunnyside resident. For 6 months, I managed to fly under Karen's radar. I'd see her monitor the neighborhood in her luxury SUV, clipboard in hand, issuing violation notices to other homeowners. But she'd drive past my house with barely a glance. I took a strange pride in my compliance, even as I secretly rolled my eyes at the monthly newsletter listing violations like unapproved wind chime audible from sidewalk and holiday decorations removed 2 days after grace period. The first sign of trouble came when I decided to improve my property by planting a row of privacy hedges along my side yard. The side of my corner lot faced a relatively busy street, and I wanted some buffer from the noise and visibility. The handbook stated clearly on page 42, Paragraph 6, natural privacy barriers may be approved, provided they do not exceed 6 feet in height and do not impede visibility at street corner. I researched extensively and selected emerald green arbor, specifically listed as an approved species on Appendix C of the handbook, and had them professionally installed, making sure they were exactly 5 feet 10 inches tall. I also made certain they were set back 15 feet from the corner, well beyond the 10-foot setback required for safety zones. I even took detailed records and photographs before and after installation, filing them away just in case there were any questions. The company I hired was on the Homeowner Association's list of approved landscapers, and they assured me everything was up to standard. The hedges looked fantastic and provided a nice buffer between my yard and the street. For 3 wonderful weeks, I enjoyed my enhanced privacy, the reduction in road noise, and the satisfying feeling of having improved my property while coloring inside the lines. Then came the day that would start the battle. I returned home from work on a Tuesday afternoon to find Karen standing in my front yard with two men operating hedge trimmers. My beautiful arbor had been butchered, cut down to barely 3 feet in height. What had been a lush green privacy screen was now a row of stumpy, pathetic shrubs that provided neither privacy nor aesthetic appeal. I slammed my car door and marched across the lawn, my anger skyrocketing with each step. "Excuse me, what's going on here?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice level despite the rage building inside me. Karen turned with that plastic smile, adjusting her designer sunglasses. Oh, your hedges were in violation of Code 4.7b. They were obstructing the critical sightline at the corner. As president, I have the authority to rectify violations when the homeowner fails to comply after notification. Notification? I never received any official notice about my hedges violating anything, I protested, looking at the mangled remains of my $2,000 investment. She waved her hand dismissively, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the afternoon sun. "It was emailed last week to all residents. The board voted and approved emergency action due to safety concerns." She pointed to a small orange flag at the corner of my property that I was certain hadn't been there that morning. "This is a designated visibility protection zone. Perhaps you should read the handbook more carefully." I was furious, but managed to maintain my composure. After all, I'd spent nearly 2 decades managing high-stress construction projects with difficult clients and impossible deadlines. "Karen, the handbook specifically states in Section 2, Paragraph 3, that any direct action by the board requires written notice delivered directly to the homeowner with a minimum 5-day compliance window. Email notifications about general issues don't qualify as direct notice of violation." Her eyes narrowed slightly, the first crack in her polished veneer. "Well, I'm sorry you feel that way, but what's done is done. The association will be billing you for the service, of course. $375. With that, she handed the workers some cash, thanked them, and walked away, leaving me standing next to my destroyed hedges and a growing sense of injustice. That night, I pored over the Homeowner Association handbook, determined to find a solution. I couldn't believe Karen had the authority to simply walk onto my property and ruin my landscaping without proper notification. Somewhere in this overly detailed document had to be a way to fight back. And there it was, in black and white. While natural privacy barriers had height restrictions, structural privacy elements were governed by different rules. Specifically, perimeter walls constructed of approved materials could be built up to 6 feet in height, provided they met county building codes and were approved by the Architectural Committee. The next morning, I submitted a detailed application to the Architectural Committee for a 6-foot cinder block wall to replace my destroyed hedges. I included professional blueprints, benefits of being an engineer, material specifications, and even computerized models showing how it would look when completed with the approved desert tone paint finish. According to the bylaws, the committee had 14 days to respond with an approval or denial. If no response was received, the application would be automatically approved. 2 weeks passed with no response. I called the Homeowner Association office twice to check on the status of my application, but both times I was told the committee was reviewing it and would respond soon. I later learned that Karen, who also chaired the Architectural Committee, had forgotten to circulate my application to other committee members. Their mistake. On day 15, I rented a small excavator and began digging the foundation trench for my wall. I was barely an hour into the work when Karen's luxury SUV screeched to a halt in front of my house. She marched across my lawn in her designer heels, red-faced and waving her arms like a traffic controller having a meltdown. "What do you think you're doing? You can't build a wall here. Stop this immediately, or I'll call the police," she screeched, her voice carrying across the neighborhood and drawing curious glances from nearby homes. I calmly turned off the excavator and climbed down, clipboard in hand. "Actually, Karen, I can." I submitted my application for this wall exactly 15 days ago, according to Bylaw 7. 3. My project has been automatically approved due to the committee's failure to respond within the 14-day window. I handed her a copy of my application with the date stamp clearly visible and the certified mail receipt stapled to it. This is ridiculous. I never saw this application, she stammered, her face turning a shade of red that clashed terribly with her coral blouse. I have the certified mail receipt showing it was delivered to the homeowner association office and signed by you personally. Would you like to see that as well? I kept my voice, even professional, but couldn't help the slight smile that formed on my face. It's all right here, along with documentation showing my hedges were in compliance before they were cut down without proper notice. Her face twisted through several emotions before settling on indignation. Well, are you calling an emergency meeting of the board to address this loophole you're exploiting? This wall will not stand, and you'll be responsible for removing it and restoring the property to its approved state. It's not a loophole, Karen. It's the written rule in the very handbook you gave me. But you're welcome to call any meeting you like. In the meantime, continue with my approved project. I climbed back into the excavator and restarted the engine, effectively ending the argument. Over the next week, I worked diligently on my wall, taking time off from work to ensure it was constructed properly. Several neighbors stopped by, curious about what I was building. When I explained the situation, many shared their own Karen stories. Unapproved bird feeders taken down, flowers ripped out because they weren't from the approved list, ridiculous fines for trash cans left out an hour too long. It seemed I wasn't the only one who had faced her wrath, just the first to fight back. Effectively true to her word, Karen called an emergency board meeting, which I attended, as was my right as a homeowner. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, and to Karen's visible dismay, it was crowded. Word had spread about our confrontation, and residents were eager to see how it would play out. Karen tried to push through retroactive denial of my application, claiming my wall posed a safety hazard and violated the neighborhood aesthetic. When I calmly cited the relevant bylaws and showed proof of my proper submission, several board members became visibly uneasy. The association's lawyer, whom Karen had brought in to intimidate me, actually ended up advising the board that my project was legitimately approved according to their own rules. The motion to retroactively deny my application failed, with only Karen and her closest friend on the board voting in favor. Karen was furious. As the meeting adjourned, she cornered me by the door. You may think you've won, but this isn't over. There are many ways to enforce community standards. I'm simply following the standards as written. Karen, maybe you should try it sometime, I replied. Before walking out the next morning, I found a notice of violation taped to my front door, claiming my construction materials were improperly stored and demanding they be removed within 24 hours or I would face a $50 per day penalty. The handbook did state that construction materials couldn't be stored in visible areas, but it also provided an exception for ongoing construction projects. With a 7-day allowance, I was well within that time frame, but rather than argue, I decided to fix the issue immediately. I rented a storage pod and moved all materials inside it by that evening, positioning it exactly 17 feet from the curb, one more than the minimum required distance. When Karen came by the next morning, clearly expecting to issue a fine, she found nothing to complain about. The look of frustration on her face was worth every cent of the storage pod rental. As my wall neared completion, Karen's harassment escalated. She reported me to the county building inspector, claiming I was building without a permit. Fortunately, I had obtained all necessary permits before starting. Another benefit of being in the construction industry was knowing exactly what paperwork was needed. The inspector came, reviewed my documentation, inspected my work, and actually praised me on the quality of the masonry. This is some of the best residential masonry work I've seen in years, he commented as he signed off on the inspection. Most homeowners cut corners, but you've gone above and beyond code requirements. What Karen didn't realize was that during his review, I casually mentioned some of the homeowner association's recent actions, including how they'd cut down my hedges without proper notice. The inspector, who seemed familiar with Karen and the Sunnyside Homeowner Association, suggested I might want to look into whether they had obtained the proper permits for some recent community improvements, including a decorative fountain Karen had commissioned for the neighborhood entrance. "Funny you should mention that," he said. "We've had complaints about that fountain, but every time we come out to inspect it, we're told the permits are in process. Been going on for months." Now, a quick search of county records revealed they hadn't just failed to obtain permits for the fountain, they had never even applied. The project had been pushed through by Karen as a community enhancement using nearly $30,000 of homeowner association funds, but without following proper county procedures. I filed a formal complaint with the county, and within days work on Karen's pet project was halted with a stop work order and a $5,000 fine to the homeowner association. But I didn't stop there. Karen's spitefulness had awakened something in me, a determination to hold her accountable for years of neighborhood tyranny. The more I researched, the more violations I found in the homeowner association's operations under Karen's leadership. I spoke with former board members who had resigned after disagreements with her. I collected stories from neighbors who had been unfairly targeted. I reviewed meeting minutes and financial statements that were supposed to be available to all homeowners but were mysteriously missing or incomplete. A particularly interesting discovery came from Mrs. Chen, retired accountant who lived 3 doors down from me. She had served as treasurer before Karen orchestrated her removal from the board 2 years ago. Over tea in her spotless garden, she shared her suspicions about financial mismanagement. "The numbers never added up," she confided. "Maintenance costs suddenly doubled after Karen hired her brother-in-law's company for landscaping. When I asked for invoices, I was told they were confidential. That's not how homeowner association finances are supposed to work." As I put the finishing touches on my wall, a flawless, professional-grade cinder block structure with a textured face and desert tin color that perfectly complied with all regulations, I also compiled a comprehensive dossier of Karen's procedural violations, biased enforcement of rules, failure to properly announce meetings, using homeowner association funds for unapproved projects, possible kickbacks from preferred vendors, and dozens of other infractions. I meticulously documented everything, creating a paper trail that would be undeniable. My wall was completed exactly 1 month after Karen had destroyed my hedges. It stood as a monument to strict compliance, perfectly within code, professionally built, and far more formidable than my gentle arborvitaes had ever been. I even added decorative planters at each end filled with homeowner association approved desert plants, a touch that several neighbors commented positively on. Each compliment felt like a small victory. The wall was completed just in time for the homeowner association's annual meeting where board elections would be held and the upcoming year's budget would be approved. I arrived early, setting up in the back of the community center with several boxes of evidence as homeowners filtered in. I handed each one a sealed envelope containing my findings, a 15-page summary of Karen's violations, with an appendix of supporting documentation, timestamps, and specific bylaw citations for each infraction. On the cover was a simple question: "Is this the leadership you want for Sunnyside Estates?" The room was buzzing when Karen arrived, 15 minutes late, and clearly shaken by the unexpected turnout. Usually annual meetings were barely attended. I'd heard last year had drawn only 12 residents besides the board. Tonight, nearly 100 people filled the room, all holding identical reports and speaking in hushed whispers. Karen faltered momentarily upon seeing everyone examining my report, but quickly composed herself and called the meeting to order. She shot me a furious glance as she took her position at the podium, but I simply smiled and gave her a small wave. She never made it past the approval of previous minutes. One of the senior residents, Mrs. Chen, stood up and moved for an immediate vote of no confidence in the current president. Citing the evidence I'd provided, Mrs. Chen called out in a surprisingly strong voice, "Before we proceed with regular business, I move for an immediate vote of no confidence in President Wilkins based on the documented violations of homeowner association bylaws, potential financial fraud and abuse of authority detailed in the report we've all received. The motion was seconded instantly by at least a dozen voices. Karen's face drained of color as she realized what was happening. Her knuckles turned white as she gripped the edges of the podium. This is completely out of line. We have an agenda to follow. This so-called report is nothing but lies and twists from a frustrated homeowner who refuses to comply with our rules. Her voice rose with each word, ending in a near scream that echoed through the suddenly silent room. Actually, Mrs. Chen replied calmly. Around the room. Furthermore, everything in this report is backed with proof, including financial records that as a former treasurer I can verify appear to show major discrepancies in how our funds have been spent. The vote was almost unanimous. Of the 9 and homeowners present, 92 voted in favor of removing Karen as president, 3 abstained, and only 2, Karen herself and her next-door neighbor, voted against. As the results were announced, a small cheer went up from the back of the room, quickly hushed, but indicative of the community's sentiment. Karen stood at the podium, clutching her gavel as her authority was stripped away in full view of the neighborhood she oppressed for years. "You can't do this," she whispered. But her microphone had already been cut off, and her words were lost in the shuffle as the vice president stepped up to take control of the meeting. "In accordance with our bylaws, I will assume the role of interim president until a special election can be held," announced David Thompson, a retired high school principal who had always seemed uneasy with Karen's aggressive approach. "My first action is to form an audit committee to review our financial records for the past 3 years. I will also be halting all violation notices currently pending until they can be reviewed for compliance with proper procedures." As the newly appointed interim president asked Karen to hand over the homeowner association records and office keys, I quietly gathered my things and headed for the exit. My work was done. I had no interest in joining the board or getting further involved in homeowner association politics. I just wanted to live in peace, enjoy my new wall, and perhaps plant some flowering vines to grow along it in the spring. Walking home in the cool evening air, I admired my wall from a distance. Solid, properly built, and entirely by the book. Just as I reached my driveway, I heard quick footsteps behind me. I turned to see Karen. Her face twisted with rage, her perfect bob slightly messy for the first time since I'd known her. You orchestrated this all along. You planned this whole situation just to ruin me." She jabbed a finger toward my chest, stopping just short of actually frustration as she realized she had no power left to use against me. "This isn't over," she spat. "I'll find a way to make you pay. Nobody embarrasses me and gets away with it." "I think it is over, Karen," came a voice from behind us. It was Mrs. Chen, accompanied by David Thompson and another former board member. "We've just had a preliminary look at the financial records you left behind. Would you care to explain why $20,000 of association funds were transferred to your personal account last month? Or why your brother-in-law's company has been paid nearly double the market rate for the past 3 years? Karen's face went from anger to shock in an instant. Her mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. For the first time since I'd met her, Karen Wilkins was speechless.